First of all, I want to say thank you to Matt Lefevers and Jeremy Jernigan for giving excellent messages the last 2 weeks. Can we thank them? Just fantastic sermons from both of them. It gives me a little time off, but that's the least of the what it does for us. It helps us hear from other people, and just a fantastic message from both of those guys. I really appreciate them. There's so much giftedness here in this church and all of our teams, and I'm just thankful. So thank you to them. Today is the 5th week of our series, Love, Dating, and Marriage, and it's amazing how fast 5 weeks goes by, but we've talked about, what love is. Just defining, is being in love really love, or what does love really look like? We talked about red flags in dating and marriage. We talked about communication and teamwork. Last week, we talked about making it through difficult times as a couple. Today, we're talking about what I consider to be the gospel of the Gottmans. We're basing this series heavily on, of course, scripture that we're going to look at here in a second, but on what is kind of the gold standard of relationship counseling, the work of John and Julie Gottman. And I think this is just the best news ever. When it comes to couples who are facing conflict, maybe you're not married, maybe you're your significant other and you've been together for a long time and you're facing conflict. Maybe you are married and there's conflict that maybe has been going on for a long time. And depending on what the conflict is, some of it can be kind of, okay, it's just an annoyance and we tolerate this disagreement we have with each other. Sometimes, don't we wish that's where it stopped? Sometimes the conflict can be exhausting. It can take its toll on us. We can find ourselves arguing about the same things over and over and over again. I'm sure I'm just thinking of me and my wife here. Nobody else, of course. But sometimes, if you can identify with us, you just find yourself in this perpetual conflict where you're always arguing about the same thing. Now, there are couples who get to that point. Let's say they're married, and they have this conflict that can't be resolved. And if there's a hum or whatever, we're going to roll with it, right? So they have a conflict that they can't get resolved, and eventually they think, you know what, that's it for us. Since we can't solve this particular conflict, maybe we shouldn't be married. And as we all know, the divorce rate is pretty high. It's debatable what it really is. The divorce rate, is it 40%? Is it 50%? We probably all think it could be lower. In this church, it's important for us to say that not all relationships can be saved. Why do you think it's important to hear that in church? Because churches have a pretty bad track record, don't they, of dealing with the complexity of relationships and broken relationships and divorce. People have been shamed who really, they did everything they could to save their marriage, and they couldn't, and they were still shamed for getting a divorce. And we don't want to do that here. We don't want to do that. We want to support marriages, help marriages to be stronger, but we also don't want to shame people. So not all marriages can be saved. It's important for people to hear that in church. And then on the other extreme, you have forces in our society that seem to just be like, okay, if you're not giddily happy every second of the day, then something's wrong, and you end that relationship. That's what happens if you go to TikTok for relationship advice. I'll just divorce them. That's like the answer to every question on TikTok. Well, maybe there's some middle ground there. So today, what we're going to talk about is resolving conflict and saving your relationship or saving your marriage when possible. And it might seem a little unpleasant for the first third of the sermon today, because we're going to talk about some difficult stuff, how to save your marriage before it starts. We're going to talk about how to know when you can't save your relationship, know when to go. We're going to talk about that. For some, it may be the first time you've ever heard that in church. And then the last 2/3, we're going to talk about probably more pleasant topics, how to resolve conflict and grow closer together as a couple. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. And today we're going to see a couple of video clips during the sermon. I wasn't so sure a few minutes ago, but now it looks like we're going to see a couple of video clips during the sermon from a couple in our church who illustrate this well, living through the issues that married people face and having dealt with that conflict well. So we're going to hear from them today. And then here's my goal for today. And it's a lofty goal, all right? But my goal today, especially if you are struggling with conflict in your significant relationship or in your marriage, that this would be the clearest and most helpful guide to saving your marriage, if it can be saved, that you've ever heard in your life, especially that you've heard in church. Now, as I say that, that's probably not a very high bar to jump over, because I think there's just a lot of bad advice out there, and especially in church. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start in a scripture that is the starting place for a lot of misunderstanding. I'm going to deal with that for a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk about saving your marriage before it starts, knowing when you can't, and then how to resolve conflict. So let's just dive in. Matthew chapter 19, this is kind of the obvious passage that we're going to start with today. It's what Jesus says about divorce in Matthew 19. Now, this passage has been used as a club to beat married people into staying in horrible marriages. It's been used to shame divorced people. It has also saved marriages, I have no doubt, all of the above, but we do need to unpack it a little bit. This passage that was written 2,000 years ago in a different context that we're going to see. So let's read Matthew chapter 19, starting with verse 3. Some Pharisees came to him, Jesus, to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Are you close readers? What words is it lawful for a who? Okay, there you go. Man to divorce his wife for what? Any and every reason. That's the question. Very important. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, is there any verse in there that says gay people don't exist? Oh, you're with me? Right? Okay. All right. And said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and then send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery. And that is one of those verses, isn't it? That is one of those passages that has been used as, man, that is black and white. Look, you read the words on the page, and then, man, that club comes out, and some people have just been beaten mercilessly by the club of this passage. So you saw me hinting there. We're an affirming church, first of all. The context here is marriage in the ancient world, and it's a quote from Genesis about God creating males and females. Does that mean that there are no gay people? And no, it doesn't. It doesn't. Okay? Are there males and females? This is the participation portion. Yeah, there are. Does that mean that there are no gay people? No. So we just dealt with that, right? There are a lot of people who hang their hat on that, and they use this as a club. Right? We're just reading the passage, okay? And then there's this question about, is there any grounds for divorce? In the Gospel of Mark, there is no sexual immorality clause. It just has Jesus saying, if you divorce your wife and you marry somebody else, you commit adultery. There's no sexual immorality clause like there is here in Matthew. So if you ask the question, what does Jesus think about divorce? What are the grounds for divorce? Well, it depends on which gospel you read. Either Matthew or Mark says different things. The context of this question is men asking Jesus, what is the minimum justification I need in order to divorce my wife and get a new wife? That's the context of the question. In the religious system of this time, a wife could not divorce her husband. A wife could file for divorce in the Roman Empire, but under this religious system, if they lived within this religious system, a wife could not file for divorce. So we're not talking about women filing for divorce. The question is, Jesus, what is the minimum bar that men need to jump over in order to trade in their wife for a younger model? That's the question. Context is important, isn't it? Can I get an amen? So important. That's the question. It was actually a rabbinical debate at that time. And what's going on here is the Pharisees are trying to make Jesus pick a side. It's Rabbi Hillel versus Rabbi Shammai, and there's so much there. I gave a sermon about this a few months ago. You could watch that on our YouTube channel. But they're trying to trap Jesus and make him pick sides. Now, there are all kinds of practical questions that come from this. What if a spouse is abusive? What if they're literally beating their partner? You stay married? Is that not sexual immorality, I guess? So I have to stay married to somebody who's beating me? What about somebody who's really toxic? What about somebody who, after years and years of trying, you're just a terrible match, and you finally figured it out? Anything there, right? That's why this passage has been used as a club so much. But what does Jesus say? Whereas these men are asking Jesus, what's the minimum bar I need to jump over here to get a new wife? Jesus challenges them, tips the apple cart, and says, that's really the wrong question. Here's the right question. What does marriage mean? What's the meaning of marriage? And he says, really, in marriage, two people become one. And splitting somebody is really painful. And so marriage means more than just dumping your current wife to find somebody else, than just getting tired of her and then jumping on the carousel. Marriage means more than that. So I think as a thinking 21st century follower of Jesus, what we can draw from this is do everything you can to save your marriage, understanding that a percentage of marriages cannot be saved. I think that's a thoughtful interpretation of this verse, considering its context. Some of you may disagree with me. That's okay. I say here often, I'm okay if you disagree with the pastor. Are you okay if you disagree with the pastor? Some people think that means they have to leave the church if they disagree with the pastor. I'm okay if you disagree. In my opinion, if you were to say to Jesus, Jesus, I'm in this toxic marriage. This person treats me horribly. It's been going on. They won't go to counseling. They won't seek. It's an abusive environment for me and the kids. Do I have to stay? I don't think Jesus would say you have to stay. It's my opinion. We can agree to disagree based on context here. But I think at the least, we can say marriage is really important. Two people become one. Splitting a person in half is really, really painful. So do everything you can to save your marriage, understanding that a percentage of marriages cannot be saved. So that's where I start with Scripture. And then I want to talk about for a moment about saving your marriage before it starts. Now, I think that all couples thinking about marriage should get premarital counseling. Married people, do you agree with that? Okay, that's going to be helpful to get premarital counseling. I think that all people who are considering marriage should listen to the feedback of people who love them, their family and their friends. Do you agree with that? Okay, I think that's definitely an important part of saving your marriage before it starts. And then I think there's a third component of saving your marriage before it starts. And if you remember back on week 2 of this series, we talked about seeing red flags in dating and marriage. And we talked about limerence. Everybody remember what limerence is? It's kind of the more academic word for being in love, which really may not have a whole lot to do with love, but it's a dopamine hit. Limerence is when you meet somebody, you're really attracted to them, you get a dopamine hit just like you're taking a narcotic. So we said that people who are falling in love are essentially smoking crack. They are in limerence, and it can be really hard to see red flags when you're in limerence. But this is what I want to focus on for a minute, is being willing to take a long, hard look at your relationship before you say I do. And if you have a gut feeling, if you have some reservations, if you have some concerns, if something feels a little off, to pay really close attention to that feeling. Do you agree with that as well? Pay really close attention if something feels a little off in your gut, if you're just not quite, if you have some misgivings at all about this relationship, no matter how hard it is if you're in limerence, to pay attention to those things. Here's why, and this is perhaps my most shameless example of pastor alliteration I've ever given in a sermon point here. Let's take a look. It's like, how many words can you get together to start with M in the same sentence? All right, so if you can overlook the egregious use of alliteration here, marriage magnifies misgivings into major problems. Again, if you can stomach the alliteration, married people, is this true? Marriage magnifies misgivings into major problems. What that means is things that kind of start as a gut feeling before marriage can grow to be a really big deal a few years later during marriage. Little misgivings that we have can turn into something that's a really big deal after marriage. And, I suppose the typical sermon illustration here might be, a man and a woman get married. Of course, it's a man and a woman, and just some trivial little thing that wasn't really a big deal. And they, his mom cooked the perfect Christmas ham. And you wouldn't it, lo and behold, their first year of marriage, his wife cooked the ham differently than his mom. And am I on the right track with a good sermon illustration here? Just really cute, kind of trivial. And they had a spat. And he said, doohickey darn heck, like he talks like Ned Flanders for some reason. I'm really upset that you don't cook the Christmas ham like my mom. And they had a spat for 5 minutes. And then they laughed and laughed. And they were married for 75 years, praise Jesus. That would be kind of the typical cute sermon illustration to tell about a point like this. I don't think that does marriage in the 21st century justice when the divorce rate is 35, 40, 50%. I don't think churches have done a very good job at preparing young people or any single people, regardless of their age, for making decisions about marriage. And cute little illustrations like that you typically hear in church, they don't do the issue justice. I think this is more like it. If you have misgivings, if you have a gut feeling, if something seems a little off before marriage, can you imagine flying to Vegas and sitting down at a blackjack table and putting half the money that you will earn over the next 10, 20, 25 years on that table? Put your children's emotional well-being on that table. Put all of your relationships on the table, your stability in life, basically everything you hold dear in life on that blackjack table and saying, hit me. That's what it's like to say I do when you have misgivings. If you have a little gut that maybe something is just a little off and you think, well, maybe I can change them. How does that work, married people? Maybe I can change them. There's this, it's a little off here, but maybe I can change them. The worst gambling addict in Vegas would be like, I can't take this amount of risk. I'm out of here. I can't stomach this. That's what people are doing. If something seems a little off and they say, I do, because maybe I can change them. Marriage magnifies misgivings into major problems. People who ignore red flags can end up in family court, trying to ruin each other's reputation, trying to take custody of the kids away from each other. I think it's just a disservice when churches kind of play cutesy about this. You can tell I'm passionate about it because I've seen people go through so much pain. And we could prevent so much heartache by helping people just to make good decisions and not rush in and pay attention to their gut and their emotion and any misgivings they may have. Do you agree with that? Yeah, you can save your marriage before it starts. Now, what happens if you don't address those red flags? Or what happens if you just couldn't see them? And you get into a marriage and things are not working out the way that you hoped. Well, part of this is unpleasant, but there's also some good news here. Because according to the Gottmans, there are only two problems that married couples face that lead to the end of a marriage. There are only two problems that any married couple faces that do and probably should lead to the end of a marriage, and they're these. I'm going to show them both at the same time. The first would be continuing infidelity / abuse / toxicity, and I think it's one thing because often it's like a vicious cycle. They feed into each other. And then the second thing, of course, is kind of an obvious one, is when at least one partner believes I can do better. And they just check out of the relationship. According to the Gottmans, and I think this is pretty good news actually, for most people, there are only two things that are really going to end a marriage, that have to end a marriage. Continuing infidelity, abuse, toxicity, or when one partner believes I can do better. Now, if I say continuing, because any sane person wouldn't judge you at all if you end your marriage after one instance of infidelity or abuse or toxicity. And if you're being abused, you just have to get out. All right? That's not, there really isn't any other way to do that. But if somebody wanted to save their marriage after infidelity, they could. There are ways of doing that. And so the Gottmans, actually this book that's read here, says What Makes Love Last, How to Build Trust and Avoid Betrayal. This is a book about that. It's about largely how to recover from infidelity. And they do define infidelity a little bit more broadly than what many think. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can even save your marriage after, one occurrence of those things. But once it continues, then there's probably just no way. Let's be realistic that you're going to save it. Or when one partner believes, I can do better. Now, there are probably a lot of other reasons that most people would think they have to end their marriage. If they're disagreeing about something, if they're arguing about something continually, they just can't get on the same page. We've grown apart, that kind of thing. But the Gottmans say these are really the only two reasons that you're pretty much guaranteed to end your relationship. Do want to say, they say there are various kinds of infidelity, not just sexual intercourse with somebody else. They write about 10 ways to betray your lover. So other than intercourse with somebody else, one is conditional commitment. If one partner is like, well, I'm here until somebody better comes along. So they're like always on the prowl. They have the radar up. Well, that's a form of infidelity. A non-sexual affair, it's an emotional affair. A friendship that is getting too close. Lying, not being honest with your partner, is breaking the marriage vow. That's not faithfulness, fidelity. Lying to them, you can't have a relationship with somebody you can't trust. Forming a coalition against your partner, which is talking negatively about your partner, so that it turns other people against your partner. Family, friends, that's infidelity, the Gottmans say. Absenteeism or coldness, they say, is infidelity, unfaithfulness. Withdrawal of sexual interest, disrespect, unfairness, selfishness, and breaking promises. The Gottmans say that all of these are examples of infidelity, not just sexual intercourse with somebody outside of marriage. But again, if you wanted to, nobody would blame you if you don't want to recover from it, but if you wanted to, there are ways that you can do that in the Gottman method. Again, if you're being abused, you just need to get away. The second reason that you can't save a relationship is when one partner, at least, thinks they can do better, and they check out. And the painful reality is that we can't make somebody love us, can we? If somebody wants out, well, then they're going to do what they're going to do. But the Gottmans say these are really the only two things that will end, they're guaranteed to end a relationship. And now if this is happening to you, then that's incredibly painful. And you're grieving, and this is a loss. It's just like a death. I say often, every loss must be grieved. But this is part of knowing when to go. Know when to go, when you can't save a relationship. So for the rest of the time, we're going to talk about the good news for many of us about how you can save a relationship even if you were convinced that there's no way. Like our arguments are, we talk about this one thing over and over and over again. There's no way we could save this relationship. The Gottmans say there is great news for couples, that most marriage problems are solvable or at least manageable. Not every problem is solvable, and we'll talk about that, but they're at least solvable or manageable. And this comes from this book here, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. You can pick this up for $12, $13 on Amazon. And the Gottmans write that there are 2 kinds of marital problems. Only 2 kinds that couples face. And this is any significant long-term relationship. So the first are solvable problems, and they can be solved. It might take a few conversations. They may come up occasionally, over and over again, but they can essentially be solved. And then there are perpetual problems that are ongoing, and many couples would just assume if we have the perpetual problems, we have to get a divorce. But the Gottmans say it's just not that way. So solvable problems and perpetual problems. Now, I'm going to play 2 video clips during the sermon today. I'm going to show the first one now, and this is an interview that I did with a couple here in the Well. And they made it clear that they've never considered divorce. They never let those words come out of their mouths. They never got to a crisis point because early in their marriage, they realized that something was happening and they needed to deal with a problem. And as you listen to this video, it's about 4 or 5 minutes. As you listen, watch for how they realized there was a problem and then how they learned to deal with this problem. They're a great example of how a couple can see something happening and then decide to address it. So this is Andy and Melissa. Let's watch their video now.
We met in February of 2005. I was your typical graduated from a conservative Christian school, and somehow God called me from Malibu to Mesa, which I do still believe he did that. Also still want to know why he wasn't called from Mesa to Malibu. Yeah. But we met at a church where I had moved out for a job there, and he invited me to his small group, and I rolled my eyes and blew him off because he was just the cocky, awesome Christian worship guy.
I was the cocky worship guy. Now I'm the humble Christian worship guy. Yeah.
And yeah, and that's when we first met.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had been at that church for a while. I was previously married, had gone through a divorce, had 2 kiddos in tow, which is a huge part of our story, of course. Okay, there's a divorced, bankrupt guy that you met at this church who plays guitar and sings. What is happening? And so we actually, one of her friends, jumped on an airplane and flew out immediately.
Oh, she came to Gilbert. Mel?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. So, and that is a good friend, right? Someone who will drop everything and just come and say, no, really, what's going on here? Because this is way out of character. And then the other part of the story is when we had our engagement party, we went out to California. We went to Malibu. And one of Melissa's friends was a private detective, worked for the FBI or the government. And his job was to vet people.
Higher level of security.
For higher level of security. So unbeknownst to me, I got the detective Love treatment. Once we walked...
His last name is Love.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We walked into where the party was, and he walked in behind me and he just goes like this to everybody, and everything changed in that moment. I was immediately accepted into the friend group.
Yep.
So community is huge. That was really when we thought we had everything kind of figured out. Yes, I knew I had baggage with two kids, but we knew exactly what that was going to play out like. We knew exactly what a blended family was going to look like. We knew exactly what doing with ex-spouses was going to look like. We had that all figured out. And then we were engaged for 10 months?
10 months.
10 months. And then reality hit. And then we were, plans are changing because there's not just our voices in things. There's an ex-wife that also has a voice in things. And there's, kids that have kind of different infrastructures and they have different influences. And so we ended up in marriage counseling. How quick?
A couple months in.
Couple months in, yeah.
It was their mom is coming back into the picture, and I'm just trying to step in and feel like I'm not picking up the pieces, but just so trying to fill whatever everyone in the situation needed to an extreme that actually wasn't the best approach. And so it took just a couple months for us to end up in a spot where we had to have someone else tell us, your marriage, your relationship, your home is being controlled by someone who isn't in your marriage and doesn't live in your home. And that was really, really tricky and really messy.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably a theme of not in a complaining way. Marriage is messy and tricky.
Yeah.
And love is messy and tricky, and life is messy and tricky. And so
Yeah.
we just kind of started there as opposed to ending up there.
Because the reality is that no matter if you have an ex-spouse or you don't, a marriage has outside influences. So it's not, oh, now the result of that counseling session was cut the ex out. That's not, they no longer have a voice, because that's not reality, right? Because there's kids involved. And then you fast forward to where, you know, the older kids, the girls are out of the house, and it's our nucleus family. There's still outside forces that control our day to day, you know? And so I think that we had to navigate us, you know, and how do you navigate those outside forces, not succumbing to them, but really what does the both and look like?
It is that Detective Love signed off on Andy. It's amazing that that's his name, first of all, Detective Love. And they did such a great job in this interview. And then you heard there at the end, they recognized this problem, what their outside influences on our marriage. And they went to counseling 2 months in. There are people who would say, man, they went to marriage counseling 2 months in? Oh, wow, that's a bad sign, you know? But actually, they've been married a really long time now. And it was a great move for them. But you hear that problem, that they realized there was an outside influence on their marriage. And it's interesting, they could have both elements as they describe this, both a solvable and a perpetual problem. Let's go ahead and dive in. So first, there are solvable problems, and here's what that means according to the Gottmans. With solvable problems, there is no underlying dilemma. It's just a problem on its face value. It's circumstantial. All right, so solvable problems can be addressed by communicating and coming to an agreement. And the Gottmans say this is about 1/3 of all problems that married couples face. We wish it was more than that, but it's 1/3. And now these are the typical problems that married couples argue about. The in-laws, exes, friends, work stress, money, sex, a new baby, housekeeping chores, time together. These are just the common things that married people argue about. And the Gottmans say these are solvable problems. Some couples, sadly, think, oh man, we need to get a divorce, when they're really facing a completely solvable problem. So the key, the Gottmans say, to solving problems is, I'll go ahead and show the steps here, Susie. We can jump ahead to these steps to solving solvable problems. Have to do entirely with our emotional state. You're doing fine. Go ahead. Our emotional, I'm skipping ahead. I'm cutting out a couple of things here. Have to do with our emotional state as we talk to our partner. So the steps to solving a solvable problem, number 1 is to soften your startup. We'll get it up there. Number 2, learn to make and receive repair attempts. Okay. 3, soothe yourself and each other. 4, compromise. And 5, process any grievances so that they don't linger. All right, okay, there's a list of steps here. Here's what the Gottmans say about solvable problems. And this is actually really empowering and encouraging. And it's so true. The Gottmans say the key to getting through these steps and solving solvable problems is to treat your spouse like you would treat company that comes over as a guest in your home. Just to be nice and civil and hospitable. Because here's what happens. You get married and you realize 2 months in, oh my gosh, you know, there are real forces here acting on our marriage. That's emotional. That, like, maybe the limerence starts to wear off. And we get keyed up and we get really emotional about this, man. Oh my gosh, are we going to make it through this? And we just get really keyed up, and maybe we feel strongly about the issue. And we forget that our spouse is another human being. And so the Gottmans write this: most of these steps take very little training because we all pretty much have these skills already. We just got out of the habit of using them in our most intimate relationship. It's so true. It's so true. To a certain degree, my fifth principle, solving solvable problems, comes down to having good manners. It means treating your spouse with the same respect you offer to company. Some people might show up at a sermon like this. They're like, give me some blockbuster piece of information. This like magic bullet. Well, this is true in a lot of relationships. It's certainly been true in my marriage, where for some reason, maybe it's the closeness, the whatever, what we think marriage is going to be, that we forget basic respect and treating our spouse just like we would treat a guest in our home. And if you had company over, you would offer them, a drink of water to be nice to them. And if it was raining, you would offer an umbrella. And in our closest relationships, we get so keyed up quickly. We get emotional, and we get entrenched in our position in a completely solvable problem that we forget to just treat each other with basic human respect. And so the Gottmans say here, we can go on to the next graphic and show those steps again. When you sit down to have a discussion about a problem where there is no underlying dilemma, it's just a common problem that couples face, soften your startup. Instead of you always, I'm so tired of, I'm sick of, just, hey, there's this thing going on, we need to talk about it. The Gottmans said a few weeks ago, they can tell how an argument's going to turn out in the first 3 minutes. How is the startup? How does the couple start? If they start well, it's probably going to end well. If they start all keyed up and emotional, it's probably not going to end well. So soften your startup. And as you go down through this list, you can see, it's pretty much just treating somebody with manners. Just being kind. Talking to your spouse like you would somebody that you just met. And you're practicing manners. And the Gottmans write that if you can discuss an issue where there is no underlying dilemma, it's just a face value issue, housework, right? Budget, whatever it might be, the common things we fight about, you're going to get a long way towards solving those problems. I have an example out of my own life. Hannah and I just reworked our family budget a few weeks ago. That's a scary conversation, isn't it? You just know going into looking at your budget, man, how could this turn out? It's one of those areas that couples often argue about. And as I reflected on it, it went really well. And I realized that our re-budgeting talk went smoothly because we started our conversation with common goals that we both already agree on. And we both took responsibility for letting some spending get out of control that kept us from that common goal. And everything else just kind of flowed smoothly after that. And we had this talk about the budget. It took one evening. We had a whole new budget, and I was like, wow, that worked really well. And it's because we did this. We started with a soft startup. There's this common goal that we already agree on, and the Gottmans say you're upping your chances for success if you start with both of you taking a little bit of responsibility for solving the problem. And 1/3 of all of the arguments that couples face, the Gottmans say are solvable just by discussing with manners, treating your significant other the way you would treat a guest in your home. Now that brings us to the second kind of problem that we'll talk about for the rest of the time today. Now I think this is really where the good news lies in the Gottman method here of relationship counseling. This could prevent so much heartache. It could save so many relationships if we can get a hold of what they refer to as perpetual problems and how to deal with them. The Gottmans say that perpetual problems are about 2/3 of all the problems that married people struggle with. Often, in perpetual problems, the couple doesn't even know the real problem they're struggling with. That's key. What makes it a perpetual problem? Here are some ways that you know it's a perpetual problem. This comes from page 237 in the 7 principles for making marriage work here. You've had the same argument again and again with no resolution. Neither of you can address the issue with humor, empathy, or affection. The issue is becoming increasingly polarizing as time goes on. Compromise seems impossible because it would mean selling out giving up something important and core to your beliefs, values, or sense of self. These are the kinds of problems, most likely, that couples argue about over and over and over again, and they just never get anywhere. And it's exhausting. And you can see how after a few years of dealing with a perpetual problem, a couple might assume, you know what, we're just not meant to be together. We're just not good together. And they might end the relationship based on a problem that the Gottmans would say is not solvable, but it's manageable. Perpetual problems are not solvable, but they're manageable. Perpetual problems lead to gridlock, where you're just stuck in this exhausting, never-ending disagreement about this particular issue. And here's what the Gottmans say is the key to beginning to manage a perpetual problem. To navigate your way out of gridlock, you have to first understand that no matter how seemingly insignificant the issue, gridlock is a sign that you each have, say it with me, dreams for your life that the other isn't aware of, hasn't acknowledged, or doesn't respect. By dreams, I mean hopes, aspirations, and wishes that are part of your identity and give purpose and meaning to your life. I'm going to read an example from the book, or a list actually, of some dreams. All right, so the Gottmans say that perpetual problems are caused by an underlying dream that is, it's hidden, or your partner hasn't acknowledged it, or perhaps your partner doesn't respect it. And here's some examples of dreams that can lie behind perpetual conflict. A sense of freedom. Maybe somebody just they want a sense of freedom in the marriage, and that's really behind whatever they're arguing about. Feeling at peace. Exploring who I am. Adventure. Like I have this dream of a marriage that's an adventure. Maybe this problem that we're arguing about isn't really about that problem. It's about, it's speaking to my sense of adventure. That's why it's a perpetual problem. A spiritual journey. Justice, honor, consistency with my past values, healing, having a sense of power in the relationship. Dealing with growing older, exploring the creative side of myself, getting over past hurts, asking God for forgiveness, exploring an old part of myself I lost. That can be a dream that lies behind problems. Having a sense of order, being productive, getting my priorities in order, exploring the physical side of myself, being able to compete and win, traveling, atoning, ending a chapter in my life, saying goodbye to something. These are examples of dreams, and you can see these are kind of abstract. But the Gottmans say these are the dreams that lie behind the perpetual problem. So there's this problem that the couple's been arguing about perhaps for years, and they just never get anywhere because they're not really arguing about the real issue. There's this surface issue that is the perpetual problem, but what's really going on is they can't compromise because there's a dream. One or both of them have a dream underneath that perpetual problem. And if they compromised on the face value problem, it would be violating their dream. Does that make sense? There's a thing behind a thing. So the couple actually never gets to talking about that thing behind the thing because they don't even know that it's there. Do you see the power of this? When there are couples who think, man, we got to just call it quits. Actually, maybe they never even understood each other's dreams to begin with. And if they did, it would unlock a whole new future for them. So, steps to recognizing somebody's dreams. The Gottmans write about becoming a dream detective, and I'm going to give you an example here. Here's some steps. Number one, you explore the dreams. You explore your partner's dreams. Number two, soothe. Right? We're soothing each other. We're saying comforting things to each other, just like solvable problems. Three, we reach a temporary compromise as much as possible. I can give a little here, you can give a little here, and then we say thank you. All right, but I want to read you an example of how this might look. Here's Kyle and Nicole, okay? Kyle says, my wife is very emotional and claims that I am far too unemotional. The difference between us makes me feel like she is overreactive and out of control at times, overly sensitive. I think being rational is usually the best approach to strong emotional situations, not getting too more emotional. My wife claims that I am hard to read and too distant. There's some couples like maybe resisting the urge to elbow each other right now. His dreams, now listen, his dreams within this conflict might be, and you can see how this works. His dream, I grew up in a family where everybody was a debater. We loved to argue with one another. My dad always asked a question, challenged me, and then took a contrary position to mine. It was no holds barred, and we all loved it. But getting emotional was illegal in this debating contest. Once someone got emotional, the argument was over. So staying in emotional control was highly prized in my family. Still is. So maybe I should be more emotional, but it's not my makeup. My dream is to be strong. I think being emotional is a weakness. Perpetual problems and the dreams underneath them they often originate in childhood, where there's something we experienced in life, and for some reason we have this dream. And so for Kyle, his dream is strength and being unemotional and logical, because that's what his dad taught him. You can see why that's important to him. Can you also see how a couple might never get there as they argue about, you're too emotional, or you're too logical, or I don't feel like he loves me, and he's not affectionate. And he's like, man, she kind of seems out of control at times. I don't know what to do. He's talking to his friends about her. She's talking to her friends about him. And they never get to the place of just like that simple paragraph that I just read. Her dreams might be, I'm just an emotional person. That's all there is to it. I think that's what life is all about. Feeling things, being in contact, responding. She says that's what responsible ought to mean, able to respond emotionally. That's the highest value to me. I respond to everything around me, to great art, architecture, children, sports, sad movies, everything. To be emotional just means being alive. This is the way I was raised, and I'm glad. My dream is to share my emotions with the person I love. If I can't, the marriage is doomed to feel dead, fake, and lonely. Wow. And you think of couples who might have dreams like this, and it can be a million different things. And they would argue about this perpetual problem, and they would talk to their friends about each other and try to get advice from their friends, which never works, by the way. And they would perhaps never get down to the dreams that they both have. The dream that is underlying this perpetual problem. How many of you think if they could have a conversation where they both shared the paragraphs I just read, there might be hope for their marriage? How many of you think that? Oh, come on now. How many of you think, if they could just share dreams, if they could sit down and say, this is what's important to me. I think this is where this comes from. And so when they talk about exploring dreams, the Gottmans would say, if you feel trapped in a perpetual problem, become a dream detective. Maybe you sit down as a couple and you say, obviously we need to talk. And that, we heard about something in church today, and maybe we have this perpetual problem. It never gets solved. I was wondering if there are dreams that we have that are behind that. And maybe some things that we've, brought from childhood or our families. What's the thing behind the thing? And you both could play detective. And you could look for each other's dreams. What's behind this perpetual problem? You're looking for a sense of freedom. And you feel like I'm controlling you. And freedom's really important to you. And we go around and around about this problem, but being free is really important to you. And maybe I'm anxious. I have this anxious attachment because people weren't really there for me when I was younger. And so I'm always worried that you're going to leave me. And so you sense my anxiety, and that makes you feel control, but what you really want is freedom. You still love me, but you want freedom, and when I get clingy with you, it encroaches on your freedom. And so what we're doing is we're violating each other's dreams. And then you have a conversation like, you know what? We've been in pain for so long. And maybe that was all unnecessary. And we just didn't understand each other's dreams. You soothe each other. And then maybe you try for a temporary compromise. And maybe the anxious spouse says, you know what? I'm going to trust you when you say you love me. And I know that you want some freedom, and by that you go hang out with friends, and we don't hang out all the time together and that kind of thing, and you need your freedom. And I just need to know that you love me and that you're not going to leave and abandon me, that your freedom doesn't mean that you're going to leave me. I wonder if we can just kind of reach a temporary compromise on time spent together and things like that. Can you see how this could be so powerful? When you talk about the dreams behind what this perpetual problem that has been going on for so long. Now, one sermon, I wish it would cure it, but one sermon is not going to cure it. And if you feel like that's an issue for you, I would recommend you pick up this book. And if this doesn't help, then you could see a counselor who is familiar with this kind of method. You don't want to go to a counselor who's just going to tell you to get a divorce if you can't agree after a few sessions. Okay, watch out for that. But you might buy this book, and there are exercises, there are checklists, there are things you can go through to identify dreams. And by definition, you don't solve perpetual problems. If you could solve them, they'd be solvable. But perpetual problems, they're there because we both have our dreams, and that's okay. And sometimes our dreams don't overlap, and so what we do is we manage perpetual problems. How? By talking together about it, by checking in. How are we doing with each other's dreams? And all of a sudden, that perpetual problem that made people think they needed to get a divorce is something that can be managed. Maybe you even form a deeper appreciation for each other. And so I'm going to close showing you the second video of Andy and Melissa here, the second part of their interview. It's about just as long. And later in the interview, they made it clear that divorce was never an option for them. They didn't want to go there. But they shared how they have been managing this ongoing influence outside of their marriage for the whole time that they've been married. So let's watch how they manage this.
And so I think the aspect of humility and being willing to recognize black and white, there's a lot of crap going on, but you've got to be real about owning your past and what you bring to the table. And I feel like that was, I think, a turning point in terms of our success, a turning point.
I think so. And we've been married 17 years now. And we have a great marriage. We really do. And the highs have been really high, but we've had some really dark lows. And I think that we've always said this, separation or not working through it was never not an option, but that was only half of it, right? Like we never used that as if you don't stop this, I'm out. Never once. And we knew that even in the honeymoon phase, that was somehow or another, we had the maturity and the foresight to set those ground rules. But then we also truly cared about the other's well-being more than our own, and we did that mutually. And that, I think, was really foundational for how we've navigated all the hard times. We wouldn't give up. We're both so stubborn. But we both trusted each other that we had each other's best interest at heart. And we still do, right? Yeah. So I don't have to worry if Melissa is trying to do something that's going to be self-serving or, quote, setting me up. And I don't think that she has to worry about that with me. We are truly out for each other.
Yeah.
And when you have that, attitude, it's a platitude, and I know, but then it's not her versus me, it's us versus the situation. And that's the cliche, but that's very true.
So when we have a moment to sit with each other, I think that what we're grateful for is we can, without hesitation, say, I have no problem giving you the benefit of the doubt, which means you're going to do stuff that bugs me. You're going to do things that hurt me.
I do lots of stuff that bother her.
Well, and I do things that bother and hurt you, right? So it's not denying that we get bothered. It's not denying that we get hurt. He hurts me. He bugs me. I hurt him. I bug him. But the foundation is I I truly do believe that he is good and that he loves me and that I can trust that. So I can say, love, I know this wasn't your intention, but this is how that hit me.
Yeah.
And I can feel safe to say that because he can trust that she knows I'm a good guy. She's not just picking a fight, and she's not going to like walk out on me, right? This is worth it enough for me to say, dude, when you do that, it hits me in my core, and I know that's not your heart. So can we talk through it?
So I want to say though, it took us about 10 years
Yeah.
to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was hard for both of us in our conflict style, is we had to learn to just address things and sit in the hard and say, okay, we might go to bed angry, right? And we have gone to bed angry. That's why God made king size mattresses, so you can go to bed angry. But we also figured out that once the cobwebs started to clear out, we trusted each other enough that we had to have the conversations. There was no hiding from it. There was no avoiding it. And we still may not agree at the end of the day, but we have to at least talk about it.
We have that foundation where I think our stubbornness is we refuse to give up on those things that we know about the other person that we really, really like.
And the good thing about liking each other is like isn't the heroin hit. Like if you liked something about somebody and you both generally stayed the same course, the likable factors are still there. It's still, I still like the same things about Melissa that I liked about her right away at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. And I think she still likes me.
I do.
So.
I do. I mean, he's still also a really hot, awesome worship guy. So
Occasionally. Yeah.
I wanted to end on that high note for you, Andy, right there. Isn't that good? Let's thank them. Just perfect. Beautiful. So the great news is that most problems that couples face are either solvable or they're manageable. We looked at the two things that mean it's going to be really difficult to save a relationship. And if that's you, you're grieving, you need support, you need love, you need to know that you deserve dignity and respect. Most problems are solvable or manageable. And so if you're struggling, I encourage you to grab a copy of this book. This is a great place to start here, The 7 Principles for Making a Marriage Work. It's where most of the material in this series has come from. All kinds of exercises about finding your dreams and dealing with perpetual problems. If there has been infidelity or I would say strong distrust in your relationship, this is a great one. What makes love last, how to build trust and avoid betrayal, both by the Gottmans. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for this information that has been shared throughout the series, from the Gottmans, their research. Oh God, we thank you for scripture that tells us that marriage means more than just, exiting, just because we run into problems and giving up at the first sight of problems. Marriage means more than that. We do everything we can to save our marriage, understanding that some cannot be saved. And for folks who have gone through that or who are maybe going through that right now, those two things that really no relationship can endure, they need your comfort, your presence. They need healing from you. They need friends. They need grace. They need to be able to grieve and know that they're worthy of respect and to be loved and treated well. For most couples, the problems that we face are either solvable or manageable. Solvable by something as simple, but still it is profound, as treating our most intimate partner the same way that we would treat a guest on our home, with manners and respect, and being able to sit down calmly and talk through a solvable problem. And then for those perpetual problems, to realize, wait a second, the reason that we can't get past this doesn't have anything to do with compatibility or whether we're quote unquote meant for each other or some magical thinking or magical solution. There are dreams underneath these problems that we haven't seen, or that we haven't acknowledged, or perhaps we haven't respected in each other. There are really closely held values and important parts of our identity that are being encroached upon here in this perpetual problem. And we have the opportunity to sit down and say, you know what? Let's be dream detectives. Let's explore each other's dreams. And my goodness, even in a problem that can't be solved, but it's managed, the appreciation and respect and maybe even the like that Andy and Melissa talked about is possible if we're willing to be dream detectives. We thank you, God, for the hope that you give us in our most intimate relationships. And of course, these things apply in friendships and all kinds of areas. But oh God, we thank you for the hope and healing as we take steps that we need to take as a couple to deal with these things. We thank you for the hope and healing we can feel. In Jesus' name. Everybody said,